This is America Daily, bringing you the best in truthful news updates and in-depth reports happening now.
Part of the struggle that I was facing is that it wasn't my only time dealing with human trafficking. I was also trafficked by somebody that I knew and trusted and loved when I was 31 years old. I know that no matter how much it hurts me to be able to talk about it, it might help somebody else. And that is the greatest addiction I've ever known, is knowing that I can help somebody else and I might be able to save just one life.
Welcome to America Daily. I'm Mark Jackson. Jeffrey Epstein used a modeling agency to single out vulnerable young women for sex trafficking. Today we hear from a pinup model and mentor on how people getting into the industry can protect themselves. She's also a speaker and published author, and she's on a mission to raise awareness about human trafficking and save as many people as she can. Here's Jessica Beatty's conversation with Amanda Blackwood.
Amanda, thanks so much for joining us today. So in addition to being a public speaker and a published author, you're also a pinup model, and you actually mentor models who are starting out in the field. As we now know, Jeffrey Epstein used a modeling agency to single out young women who would be vulnerable to trafficking. Could you tell us a bit about your work mentoring models and how people can stay safe in the industry?
So I was taken advantage of early on in my career when I first started getting into modeling by photographers who told me, you're never going to get any of these jobs or be hired in any way unless you take off more of your clothes. And you can go down to just your bra and your underwear if that's what you want to do, but you need to go at least that far. And they would constantly pressure me to try and get me to go further down that dark road. And at the time I was married. I absolutely refused. I was 24 years old and I worked with this guy multiple times. And eventually this photographer did actually talk me into doing a photo shoot in nothing but my bra and underwear and a bathrobe. And I was disgusted by it. So one of the things that I'm really passionate about now is making sure that there's other young ladies out there who are trying to get into this industry. I want them to understand they don't need to get naked to be beautiful. They don't need to strip down to their underwear to feel or to be beautiful. There are different levels. I mean, there are people out there who know exactly what they want to do and they want to show off their bodies. But if somebody isn't comfortable with that, they should never feel pressured into doing something like that. I work with several photographers here in Colorado, one in particular, Sassy Knot Photography. She is a phenomenal photographer. She happens to also be my best friend, so a little bit of plug for her. But Colette is incredible. She and I both have the same vision for what it is that we do. We want to change the pinup culture. People these days think pinup means burlesque or nudity or lingerie, and that's not the case. Pinup is something that a 4-year-old can do. You don't want to see a 4-year-old in lingerie. A pinup can be a little girl wearing a poodle skirt with her hand behind her head and one on her hip with her hair in a ponytail. That's pinup. Pinup is things that are styled in the old-fashioned era, particularly the 1930s, 1940s, the war effort. So that's what we're wanting to bring back. We want to bring back a style of class and dignity to pinup modeling, and that's what we are most passionate about.
As you just mentioned, there are photographers who will try to take advantage of people, but then you have your friend who's trying to raise awareness about all this stuff. And it's the same in other industries. There are good and bad people at the top. I was wondering if you could comment on any people you think are worth mentioning who have either been arrested for trafficking or who are actively trying to end it.
Absolutely. There's a billion different names that I could drop right off the bat. I'm thinking Jeffrey Epstein, sure. Allison Mack, who was on Smallville, she was involved with the cult that was heavily involved in human trafficking. She had some pretty nasty stuff in her history. Then there's R. Kelly, which we all know just recently hit the news. Then we're talking about the Patriots owner from last year. There was this huge human trafficking ring that was busted wide open, and he was taken down with that. But if these are the only cases that we're actually talking about, imagine how many thousands are otherwise out there being busted open nobody's talking about because it doesn't have a famous name attached to it. So then you've got people like Lori Holden. She herself actually brought me to Operation Underground Railroad, which is run by a former Navy SEAL, Tim Ballard. Lori Holden herself, she was on Walking Dead. She played Andrea, if anybody is a fan of the show. And she herself actually went down to Cartagena and took part in a raid where she put on a wig and sunglasses so that nobody would recognize her. And then she kept the children safe while these traffickers were taken down by the good guys of Operation Underground Railroad. She was physically there, physically doing her part to help out, to fight. And in that raid, I think they saved over 50 children in that one raid. Then you've got people like Ashton Kutcher and Demi Moore. They started their own campaign with Thrive. And Ashton Kutcher is very outspoken about fighting human trafficking and how that works and, what people need to do to be, a part of that fight. You've got people like Emma Thompson, who's done not only her art exhibit that was displayed in containers, like moving containers, but she also was the executive producer for a movie called Sold in 2014. I mean, there's tons of people that are both against and for human trafficking in pretty much every level of power around the world.
One of the reasons you're so vocal about helping victims of human trafficking is because you yourself are a survivor. You published a book about your story last January called Detailed Pieces of a Shattered Dream. Could you tell us a bit about your story?
Yeah, absolutely. Detailed Pieces of a Shattered Dream. That's the one I came out with last year. It talks about my first time in human trafficking. It talks about how I ended up in the position that I ended up in without any kind of assistance, how dark it got, and how I was sold from this young couple to this other person, and exactly how I got away. Basically, I got away because I watched an awful lot of MacGyver as a kid. And I learned early on that all of life's problems can be solved with nothing but a rubber band and a paperclip. I've since written to Richard Dean Anderson, who was the original MacGyver when I was a kid, and thanked him for being MacGyver because it was his acting that made the show so interesting and fun. But it was the show that basically saved my life. I've never gotten a response from him. From what I understand, he's a little bit of a recluse, but that's okay because I think he's at least seen the message, and I think he knows that I appreciate him and will never ever feel like I was truly alone in that moment because I had Richard Dean Anderson.
I know it's not easy to talk about, so thank you for sharing your story. I think there are probably a lot of misconceptions about human trafficking. I wondered if you could straighten some of those out for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So a big one is that human trafficking is about sex trafficking. That's not the case. I believe it's something like 64% of all trafficking victims are actually forced labor. But that's worldwide. 17% is sexual trafficking. 16% is forced labor camps that are imposed by the governments. But what we're talking about is there's estimated 24.9 million slaves in existence right now today. So rather than breaking this down into percentages, which don't actually compute in our human brains, we're going to break it down into numbers. So forced labor worldwide, that would be 16 million people. 17% of human trafficking that is sexual slaves is 4.1 million people. I mean, we're talking huge amounts of people, more than what were killed during World War II. Massive amounts. Like I said, there's more slaves right now in our current day and time than at any other point in human history. And that's something that most people can never wrap their brains around, is because it's not legal. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Another one is that not every victim is a prostitute. Like I said, there's a lot of forced labor. But even in the world of sex trafficking, not every victim is a prostitute. I was not a prostitute. I was forced into situations that I should have never been in. And with my second experience with human trafficking, I was basically repeatedly raped up to 20 times a day, 5, 6, and sometimes 7 days a week. If I didn't comply or if I fought, I wouldn't get food. I would not be allowed the privilege of going outside. I wouldn't have electricity for the day. There are levels to this that include sleep deprivation and even waterboarding. There was torture that was happening to me if I didn't comply with absolutely everything that I was told or asked to do. So while I was not a prostitute, I was treated worse than a rat scurrying around on the streets. I was nothing to these people. Trafficking is not always about forcing women into the sex trade. A lot of times it's about forcing women to give up their babies. And human trafficking includes having these women give birth repeatedly and then sell their babies to, or give their babies to these agencies that will then turn around and sell them for adoption fees. There's also, in other countries, there's a real problem with kidney harvesting, organ harvesting. That's another form of human trafficking. People think that the victims choose their fate because they might be desperate, because they're down on their luck, because they have nowhere else to go, or because they have a drug habit. So many of these victims don't develop a drug habit or an alcohol problem until well after they're already trafficked. And that's their way of being able to cope with what it is that's going on, or their way of the pimps being able to keep control over their product. People often think that survivors are going to return to their pimps or go back to that way of life because that's what they know, because that's how they made money, that's how they were comfortable. And while some do, not all of them do. And honestly, I believe every single one of them deserve the chance to have a better life and to understand that they're worth more than that. Probably one of the biggest misconceptions is pornography. The majority of pornography that is created today is actually done using people who are victims of human trafficking. It's well over 80-90%. I was shocked when I learned this myself, but at the same time I wasn't, because it happened to me. And I know there will come a day, there will come a time that something about me is going to surface, and I will be humiliated. And I say this now because it's already happened. I've lost a job, I've lost friends, I lost a good chunk of my life because photographic evidence of what happened to me my second time being trafficked was sent to a former boss of mine, and it got out and it was all over the internet, and it completely destroyed the life that I had. And that was when I stood up and said, I am never going to be a victim again. And if he's sharing this stuff about me, he's turning me into a victim from thousands of miles away. He's doing it to me all over again, and I can't let that happen. And I decided finally that I was going to stand up and take a stance and fight back. And if I have to shout it from the rooftops and tell everybody in the world what happened to me before somebody else does, that's what I'm going to do. You know, if somebody else is going to treat my life like a joke, I might as well make it up as I go along. I'm going to fight back the only way I can.
I'm so sorry that that happened to you. It kind of brings me to my next question, which is, how do you think things have changed since the internet was introduced? Is it more safe for children now, or is it less safe?
Well, the internet has changed things in a lot of different ways. It's both safer and less safe. One of the biggest things that I try to remind people is that children of 12 and 14 years old are the usual most common victims of sex trafficking here in the United States. The average age is between 12 and 14. It's right now a rough estimate, because they don't have exact numbers, 75% women or girls, 25% boys. So it's happening with every gender. It's happening through social media. It's happening through Facebook, through Instagram, through Twitter. You're seeing this on Craigslist. Backdoor was just shut down just recently for human trafficking. What they didn't tell you was that the majority of the human trafficking was underage children. It's happening everywhere. And there are now several websites where cyber sex with children is a hot topic. The majority of these children are being abused by their own family members, usually parents. And these videos are online that people can go online and purchase the rights to be able to view. This is a huge deal. Not only can you purchase a child for sex just as easily as you can order a pizza to be delivered to your home, but you can go online and watch these videos of these young children being raped by their own parents as young as 4 and 5 years old. It's disgusting. But it also makes it easier to report these incidences. It's easier now if you go on Facebook and look up human trafficking organizations. You can find one in every single state in the United States and in most countries around the world that you can contact if there's somebody that you're worried about or something that you've seen that you think needs attention. If you're not comfortable approaching the police, it's so much easier now with the internet to be able to look up a human trafficking hotline, which is a 1-800 number or an email address, and be able to send them a message and say, hey, this is what I saw, this is what I witnessed, this is the license plate or the description of the person that I saw, and this is where it happened. It makes it so much easier to be able to report, but it also makes it a lot easier to sell these poor babies.
Do you have any other tips on how we can protect children?
The best key is always going to be education. A lot of people out there don't want to face the ugly truth that human trafficking is a reality in our world right now. And because of that, and because they think it's too big and they can't do anything about it, they're stepping back and they're plugging their ears and going, I don't want to hear this. It's too scary. But you know what? If you have kids, it needs to be scary. People need to be informed of what can happen to their children, and it's happening in higher and higher numbers constantly. So I would say reach out to one of these organizations in somebody's state. Here in Colorado, I personally work with Covered in Feathers, which they just recently changed their name to Covered Colorado, because the harsh reality is that feathers are too soft of a subject material for what we're dealing with. So Covered Colorado and Shift Freedom. Shift Freedom holds a conference every year where people can get a little bit more informed. They can come and talk to survivors and get to know the experts and hear witnesses and FBI and local law enforcement talk about what it is that they need to keep their eyes open for. I would say get involved with these organizations in every state. If you can't make it to a meeting, see if you can bring the meetings closer to you. See if you can get your neighborhood interested in learning more about human trafficking, learning more about what can be done. Reach out to these organizations and see if they've got a representative. And sometimes it might be a survivor that might come and help to educate the local communities. They can do it at a conference center, they can do it in a community center, they can do it at the local law enforcement. It doesn't matter where it happens, just so long as people are making an effort to get educated and to learn just a little bit more about what to watch for. And that's the only way that this is ever going to not happen to somebody else's child.
Can parents themselves do anything to make their children feel safe or so they won't want to run away?
I think it goes child by child. It's like for my own childhood, I'm a redhead. I'm not going to lie, I was a rebellious child, and I started out quite early being a little rebel girl. My brother never ran away. I was the runaway. I was the trouble kid. It definitely goes child by child, but keeping an open line of communication is huge. You want to make sure that you're not... I actually just recently had this conversation with somebody when we were on a long car ride about parents and children, and if the child fesses up to doing something wrong, the child gets in trouble. If the child lies about it and doesn't get caught, the child doesn't get in trouble. If the child lies about it and gets caught in the lie, the child gets in trouble. So the only chance that the child has of not getting into trouble is to lie and hope that they don't find out. And that was kind of how I was raised. If I did something wrong, I got in trouble. If I did something wrong and lied about it and they found out about it, they would tell me that I would be in more trouble, but that didn't compute in my brain. All I knew was that I was in trouble. So I lied. If a child thinks that they're going to get in trouble for telling the truth, they're always going to do what they can to kind of get around having to tell the truth. And sometimes that means leaving details out. I know I was really guilty of that. Sorry, Mom and Dad, if you're watching. But if a child feels like they can come to you and tell you whatever it is that's going on and they're comfortable with talking to you about it, they're going to tell you when somebody has said something weird or approached them in a strange way. But it's really also important to stay involved in the kid's life and to make sure that you know what they're doing on social media. There's a lot of traffickers, like I said, on Facebook, on Instagram, and on Twitter. A lot of these pedophiles, if you ever watch the programs on TV about how to catch pedophiles, they like to pretend to be children about your children's age, and they try to befriend them and then talk them into hanging out with them when their parents are gone. And what really ends up happening is these people end up getting these children over to their homes and stuff and taking complete advantage of them. Then they'll tell these kids a lot of times, don't tell anybody, or I know where you live and I'll come kill you, or I'll come kill your mom, or I'll come kill your baby brother. And those are some of the worst threats that a 12, 13, 14-year-old kid could ever possibly imagine hearing.
That's great advice. What you just said kind of ties into a Twitter thread of yours that went viral recently. In it, you said that most trafficking survivors don't talk about their experiences because they blame themselves for being abused. I wanted to ask if you have any advice for people on how to stop blaming themselves. How did you get through it?
I have what I genuinely call the redheaded attitude. I didn't have it for a long time, and I definitely felt like everything was my fault. And when it finally dawned on me one day that it wasn't actually my fault, it was as though somebody hit me over the head with a hammer. There wasn't any one thing that was a catalyst or the straw on the camel's back. It was just this moment of clarity where suddenly I realized that I might have been in a bad situation, but that didn't give anybody the right to hurt me or abuse me. And I definitely needed to be more mindful about the kind of situations that I put myself in. But what happened to me was not my fault. And I can't say that enough for the other people out there that are coming to me lately and letting me know that they're survivors of human trafficking also. And this has been happening almost daily since this tweet article actually went viral recently. I've had a lot of people reach out to me. One day I just woke up and said, no more. I'm not going to be a victim anymore. I am not going to be at blame anymore. I am done with all of it. I think what really helped me to put it all the rest of the way to bed and not have to worry about it anymore was writing my book. I never wrote my book thinking that I was going to be famous or that I was actually even going to publish a book. I wrote this entire thing basically because I needed to get it out of my system. I always kind of figured that, I always wanted to write a book, but I figured that I would publish a fiction story, not my own story. But it definitely helped. I didn't write it for anybody but me. And I think that was when I let go of the blame. I started analyzing a lot of the details when I was writing this book. And those details coming back to me reminded me of everything that led up to that moment and how there were a lot of things that just aligned just right, like a plane crash. It's no one thing that causes a plane to go down, but a series of events that causes the crash. And that was my life.
So what kind of response have you gotten from people? Are there any stories you can share?
There was a young lady who came to me just the other day through Facebook Messenger on my public page. And she told me that she was facing a crisis in a shelter where she'd been staying. I urged her to get out of there and to be able to find somebody that could help her. She didn't trust law enforcement, so I got her in touch with a human trafficking organization that kind of swooped in and picked her up and just gave her a place to stay and welcomed her with open arms and really helped her out a lot. I've had others that have started asking me about prosecution and what are the odds and who do I talk to. I wrote my book in January of last year. Since then, my goal has been to help at least one survivor of human trafficking every month. Sometimes I'm helping victims, sometimes I'm helping survivors. As long as I can help one person a month, I'm happy. This article went out, I think it was Tuesday of last week, and since then I've been able to help several people every single day. This is huge for me. These people are reaching out to me and telling me, I need help and I don't know who to trust, but I trust you because you've been there. I'm a survivor. I'm outspoken. I don't hide what happened to me. I'm also a leader of a small group of survivors here in Colorado. And we don't necessarily always talk about the nitty-gritty stuff, but sometimes it helps just being in a room or having a conversation with somebody that you know isn't going to judge you because of your past, because they've been there too. And that's huge. A lot of people have no idea how to talk to somebody who is a survivor of human trafficking. More times than I can count, when I open my mouth and say, yes, hi, my name is Amanda, I'm a survivor of human trafficking, I'm met with an awkward silence. I usually know how to take advantage of that moment and tell them all about how they can get involved and if they want to know more. But a lot of people don't know how to do that. It's that redheaded attitude again.
So in your book, you said you have a goal of saving 100 human trafficking victims for each of the 6 girls who didn't make it out of the house with you. I wanted to ask you how we as a society can help you do that.
That is an awesome question. I had my own charity that I started up last year. It was called Redheads Unite. Part of the reason that I was taken the first time that I was because I had red hair. It would be a lot easier for the traffickers to put me in a red dress and purple gloves and turn me into Jessica Rabbit and into some redheaded sex symbol if I already had red hair. It's hard to do that with a blonde or a brunette. So it actually made me worth more money. And oh, by the way, that I love asking this question of people, and there's no wrong answer. And I'm not going to be offended no matter what you say, because I'm not the one that sets these up. But when I was sold from one person to another, how much do you think my entire life was worth?
You mean how much they sold you for? I have no idea.
Most people don't. My life was worth $90, 90. The average going rate, from what I understand around that time, right there between these people, was about $80. I was worth $10 more because I had natural red in my hair. It's pretty messy, especially when you break it down and you realize that the majority make upwards of an average worldwide $100,000 per year.
That's horrible. I've never actually thought about that, but it's really shocking.
Yeah, it's an ugly world. It's brutal. I thank you to ask me about what we could do as a society to help fight human trafficking. It comes down to, once again, the education. It doesn't have to be just parents getting involved with fighting human trafficking. It can be anybody. It can be a grandma and grandpa. It can be a single guy who is tired of sitting on his couch watching TV at night. It can be women who decided that they wanted to get a little more involved. It can be anybody. So when I started my own charity organization, it was Redheads Unite. Last year I had an event where I had vendors, I had live music by one of American Idol's top 40, Richie Law. He came out and actually played at my event for free, just to help us draw more people in to try and raise money for the cause. All the money that I was raising was going to the charity that I'd chosen for that year, was Operation Underground Railroad, which is the one that Lori Holden had sent me to. People can learn a lot more about human trafficking by going online, but they can also get involved in organizations like Operation Underground Railroad, Shift Freedom, Covered Colorado. Getting involved with these groups, they're going to learn a lot more, but they're also going to have hands-on experience. They're going to be able to they're constantly looking for mentors over at Covered Colorado to help these girls that are transitioning from being victims to being survivors. They constantly need this influx of people that's willing to help. That's the greatest way to learn, is getting hands-on experience, getting in there and seeing what it's about. It can be a little scary. It can be a little overwhelming at first, but it's absolutely worth every second that you can possibly help to save somebody else.
So you have 4 books published right now, and your most recent book is a collection of poems that you wrote. Could you tell us a bit about that book?
Yes, I actually have that one in my hands right now. It's a 257-page book all about the poetry that I wrote when I was transitioning between being a victim to being a survivor. So most of the stuff is stuff that I had written after my second time of being trafficked to Scotland, and it's broken into emotions. So there's moments of love and moments of hate, moments of strength and moments of weakness. And it goes back and forth between the opposites of everything that I felt and everything that I had been going through while I was trying to just survive. That first year coming back from that was the hardest. I have a shadow box that hangs on my wall in my living room to remind me every single day of all the stuff that I did and didn't do in order to keep me alive for that year. Less than 2% survive. And out of that 2%, a lot of us take our own lives. So that's this one. That's Twisted Fate. That's all the stuff that actually did keep me alive, was writing these poems and trying to figure out how to cope with everything that I was feeling, everything that I was going through. It got really ugly a few times, which is why I had to break it down into different emotions when I published the book.
Could you share one of your poems with us?
Sure. I'm trying to figure out which one. My Life in Hell. That's probably a pretty good one. It talks about what it was like being there, and this one I actually wrote while I was putting the book together. So it's a little bit more gritty talking about what it is that I survived and why it was that I was putting this book together. My life in hell. Survivors of human trafficking live in fear. They're afraid that someone else might find them, or worse, hunt them. My second experience with human trafficking. I was stalked for a while by the man I had escaped. I was hunted. He was looking for the right opportunity to catch me alone. He traveled to the United States from out of the country to do so. Survivors have every right to be afraid. Honestly, that's what prevents most survivors from speaking out. I've had several friends of mine come forward after I told my story in order to tell me their own. I never knew they were survivors. I never would have known if I hadn't come forward and told them that I was. As much support as I've found in finally coming forward with my story, I'm also ridiculed and laughed at, judged viciously by none so much as my own parents. They still try to claim it never happened and that I wouldn't know how to tell the truth. What people don't realize from reading the book is that it happened to me more than once in my adult life. I'd been victimized and abused multiple times, but until I was able to come forward about it, the cycle did not end. I talked about the first experience I had with human trafficking, how I ended up there, how I got away. What I don't talk about is the dark and twisted road my life took, and for how many years afterward. I really was caught up over and over in this nightmare that became my life in hell.
Is there anything else you'd like to add that I didn't ask about?
If anybody needs any help trying to find an organization in their area, my copy of Detailed Pieces of a Shattered Dream that's available online, there's actually a section in the back of the book now that provides at least one anti-trafficking organization per state here in the United States and a couple of international organizations as well. If somebody needs help outside of that, please feel free to reach out to me. I will help you to find somebody that is anti-human trafficking that you can work with, either to learn more about trafficking or to find the help that you need if you are a victim of human trafficking and looking to get out.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Amanda, and for sharing your experiences and your wisdom. You can find Amanda Blackwood on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and you can find her books on Amazon. We'll link to her website in the description. Once again, I'm Jessica Beatty. Thanks for listening to America Daily.